What's good, people? Thanks as always for passing by the channel. Much appreciated. Hit that subscribe button if you guys are new. All right, James Degale versus Chris Eubank Jr. Where do we start? Let's start with this. I can't wait for this fight. I really can't wait for this fight. I've always said, and I think I said it when this fight was first mentioned, I did a video on it talking about it. Good fights don't necessarily have to be between the elite of the elite, right? I mean, they don't have to be between the pound for pounders. Sometimes those fights are boring. Sometimes they kind of play out as chess matches and no one wants to do anything. We've seen that before with some of the best fight the best. Sometimes good fights are just based on styles, matchups, beef, animosity, and this fight has a bit of all those things, right? Chris Eubank and James Degale do not like each other. It isn't fake. This is very, very real. I'm not putting it up there with Dillian Whyte versus Derek Chisora. No one's going to flip a chair and try and bottle anyone, but this really does have animosity, and it stems back from years and years ago. And you know what? It's built up quite nicely. It's built up nicely because it really is a loser leaves town fight. It really has that. For James Degale, if he gets beat by Chris Eubank Jr., I don't know where he goes. I really don't know where he goes. And for Chris Eubank Jr., if he gets beat by James Degale, who clearly is 3 or 4 years past his prime, then yes, he might be able to go down to 160. But I think that might be it for Chris Eubank Jr. as well. So this fight really does have everything on the line for both of these guys. And I do think Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn will be kicking themselves that they both didn't get this fight. Both had options to get this fight, and both, I think, turned it down because they maybe deemed it not pay-per-view worthy. And that was the only way they were going to be able to pay James Degale and Chris Eubank. But nonetheless, if you just look at the way people are talking about this fight in the media, if you look at the way it's been built up, and I think ITV have done a fantastic job, I think this fight could surprisingly do good numbers, right? I think this fight could maybe touch the 250,000 pay-per-view buy mark, and that's a good number. That's a good number for these two guys. Remember, we're not talking two world champions anymore. We're not talking two guys that I think are at the elite at 168. We're just talking a grudge match. And grudge matches sell. I think ITV have done a very, very good job in building this as well. I like the little clips they're showing on their YouTube channel of Chris Eubank behind the scenes and James Degale behind the scenes. And I can't lie to you, I very much enjoyed the face-to-face. And what I learned from that face-to-face is Chris Eubank really is delusional. Like, I've called some boxers out and said they're delusional. I think I've said Amir Khan's a bit delusional. I think I've mentioned a few other boxers as well. But Chris Eubank is top of the tree. He really is top of the pile. His confidence level, for someone that I don't think has done very much in boxing, he's done okay considering that there wasn't much amateur background, it's unbelievable. It's through the fucking roof. It's almost, and this is the mindset you need in boxing, but it's almost like he's discarded the Groves performance. Billy Joe Saunders didn't mean anything in terms of that performance, and is like fully focused on James Degale. Whereas James Degale was genuinely looking at Chris Eubank thinking, you're crazy. I mean, look at my resume, look at your resume. I think he even mentioned something along the lines of, we shouldn't even be discussing boxing. Like, he's looking at Chris Eubank thinking, we are levels apart. And if you were just to go by their resume, and let's not forget, James Degale is coming off a win against Truex, but if we were to go off their resume, James Degale is miles above Chris Eubank Jr. Chris Eubank Jr.'s biggest win is probably a faded Arthur Abraham. I'm thinking that probably is his biggest win, like a faded Arthur Abraham. Whereas James Degale has been in there with, at the time, the best at 168. And there was a time when he was the number one 168 pounder. And let's give him credit for what he done. I thought he looked awful in the first Caleb Truex performance. He moaned about shoulder injuries and so on and so forth. What he did, though, was very brave in taking the rematch away from home and grinding out a win. So we've got to give credit to James Degale. And I think of all the world champions we've had in recent years, I mean the top world champions, I think he's probably the most underrated world champion. What he's done in terms of going away and fighting the likes of Lucien Bute and Andre Derrell and Badu Jack and Caleb Truex and others as well should be applauded. But I think the British public just don't show him enough respect. I really do. And I think this is his chance to get that respect. I think George Groves got the big respect when he beat Chris Eubank Jr. And I think James Degale will get a bit more respect. Not enough, but will get a bit more respect if he beats Chris Eubank Jr. For Chris Eubank Jr., yes, he's got a new trainer, but I don't know what a new trainer can do in 12 weeks. His new trainer said things like his head movement's non-existent, his footwork's non-existent. I don't know if you can correct those things in 12 weeks. I remember when Floyd Mayweather Sr. tried to come in and change things with Ricky Hatton, that didn't quite work. And Ricky Hatton's levels above Chris Eubank Jr. So I really don't know if a new trainer is going to add anything to Chris Eubank Jr. I almost feel like with him, it's just a case of bite on your gum shield and do what he does. And what he does is last the 12 rounds. What he does is have a great chin. If he can somehow weather the storm, and there will be a storm from James Degale for the first 6 or 7 rounds, and still be there where it's close, not wide like the Billy Joe Saunders or the George Groves performance. If he can maybe nick 2 or 3 of the first 6 to 7 rounds, then there is a good chance his stamina, because he is probably one of the fittest boxers out there, will shine through and he might nick a result. But I have to say, I think James Degale is just too good for him. Like, James Degale, I think, yes, this isn't the James Degale 4 or 5 years ago, but I still think there's enough in the tank for James Degale to outbox Chris Eubank Jr. I'm not fooled by Chris Eubank Jr. I'm not fooled by the hill sprints and the hitting the pad 1,000 times. I'm not fooled by it. I was massive on him going into the George Groves performance, and he was awful. Like, let's have it right. He was awful. He was awful. And I don't see how you can change that now to beat James Degale. And I do think James Degale is a better boxer than George Groves. I think George Groves has a better jab, but in terms of overall boxing technique, I think James Degale is just slightly above George Groves. So I just don't see how Chris Eubank Jr. does it. Again, if he can nick a couple of those early rounds, so maybe, again, 3 of those first 6, then he has a chance. But I think he's too stubborn to take instruction. I think the boxing ability just isn't there. I think he's way too small for 168 pounds. And every time we've seen him step up, and this is only twice, but the twice we've seen him step up against very good fighters, he's looked awful in both. I mean, Billy Joe Saunders for the first 7 rounds just destroyed him. And I think it was only his fitness that got him, you know, close to a decision. And George Groves, again, just manhandled him. So I can't wait for it. I'm saying all this, it could go the other way. It's a fantastic fight. The undercard is good as well. Obviously, Joe Joyce versus Bermane Stiverne. Lee Selby makes his lightweight debut. So ITV have put together a very, very good card. If, by the way, you're like me, you're in Africa and you haven't seen the face-off, I struggled to watch it on ITV Boxing's YouTube page. We weren't allowed to watch it in Africa. You can go and watch it on Chris Eubank Jr.'s Facebook page. That's where I watched it. And that goes for the Americans as well. Where will the winner go? If James Degale wins, then obviously we could have that big Callum Smith showdown, and it will be a big one. Especially if James Degale looks impressive against Chris Eubank Jr., then it will be a good fight between him and Callum Smith. I think Callum Smith will probably beat him now because he's too fresh for him, but again, that's a good matchup. If Chris Eubank Jr. wins, fuck me, the ego is going to go through the roof. He will call out every man in his dog between 154 and 175. But if Chris Eubank Jr. wins, I think it sets up a Billy Joe Saunders showdown. Especially if Billy Joe Saunders, this is all ifs and buts going on here, but if Billy Joe Saunders beats Demetrius Andrade for the 160-pound belt, which is a tough fight, I know Billy Joe Saunders is then going to want, you know, the mix of Canelo, GGG and Danny Jacobs. I get that. But Billy Joe Saunders versus Chris Eubank Jr. showdown, if Chris Eubank Jr. looks impressive against James Degale, is massive in the UK. Massive. And that would be a good fight, right? They'll build it up well. Chris Eubank Jr. knows how to sell the fight. Billy Joe Saunders knows how to sell a fight. BT Sports will try and put it on pay-per-view. That would be an interesting fight. So that's the fight I'd like to see if Chris Eubank Jr. wins. If James Degale wins, Callum Smith. But there, the video's over. What do you guys think? Who wins? How do they win? And where does the winner go? And where does the loser go? Does the loser retire? Like, legitimately, does the loser retire? James Degale's talking about retiring. Chris Eubank Jr. is not even mentioning that. But I think it will be a long way back for the loser just because the egos are so fucking big. What do you think? Peace.